Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Gwent, the Witcher card game. So, this week we're going to be taking a look at a new list. This is a Queensguard deck. So this is quite a popular deck, although it has fallen out of favour quite a fair bit in this most recent patch for a few reasons. Marigold Hailstone is a little bit of a heavy hitter on the front row from time to time, but sometimes you can end up getting the last move as well, so it plays out alright. And then it does have a few little troubles as well with Graveyard Hate, although if you play around that, it's not going to be too much of an issue. So, the namesake card, Queensguard, says 4 strength on the melee row, and it says when you deploy it, you get to resurrect all your Queensguards. So every single Queensguard in your graveyard comes into play whenever you play a Queensguard. So the idea is that we use King Bran, our leader. Thank you. 2 strength, doomed, stubborn, veteran 1 with deploy. So when we deploy him, we get to discard 3 cards from our deck and strengthen all the units among them by 1, and then shuffle your deck. So usually within the first few turns of the first round, you want to go with your King Bran. You want to discard 2 Queensguards and then the Saris as well. We'll get to the Saris in a moment, but when you do that, you end up strengthening them by 1 as well. So these Queensguard become 5 strength, and this one becomes 7 strength, which actually offsets their power level, which plays around things like Scorch and Geralt Igni. Although they're not being played very often, it's still a good idea to play around them nonetheless. So, we can also make more Queensguards as well by using things like Operator. Operator is a 7 strength ranged unit that says when you deploy him, if neither player has passed, you get to choose a bronze unit in your hand and create a base copy of it in both players' hands. So you really ideally want this guy in your hand at the start, otherwise he tends not to be as high impact as you might want him to be. So in the later rounds, rounds 2 and 3, you're probably going to end up mulliganing him anyway, but if you get him in your opening hand, then he is super awesome. So what he essentially does is create a copy of a bronze unit. So we're going to select Queensguard most likely, which creates a copy in our hand of Queensguard, generating us 4 Queensguards in total to resurrect, but it also puts one in our opponent's hand as well. The Queensguard in our opponent's hand is not that useful to them at all, really. So once it goes into their graveyard, we can use things like Donor and Hindar. 8 strength ranged unit that gets to toggle a lock, and then it gets to move a bronze unit from your opponent's graveyard to your graveyard. So we can actually take the Queensguard that we generated from the operator that went to our opponent, and we can put that into our graveyard so that we can resurrect up to 5 Queensguards every single turn. So you can imagine how quickly we end up getting value off just playing a single card. We resurrect 4 other Queensguards that will have been buffed by King Bran and other cards as well that I'll get to in a moment. Donor and Hindar as well is also a good way to play around a lot of Graveyard Hate in other decks. So, for example, in Monsters, you've got Caretaker that resurrects a bronze or a silver card from your graveyard. So if they resurrect your highest Queensguard, that can be really bad, so you've got to be aware of that. And Donor and Hindar allows you to essentially pull it back into your graveyard, either in the following round, or if we end up killing the Queensguard, we can pull it then and resurrect it. Things like Katakan as well are also something to worry about in Monsters, because it tends to be an auto-include, so you got to be really careful with the certain matchups. Vikavara Medics in Nilfgaard as well resurrect from graveyards. They could use it to take one of your Queensguards. So if you're in the 3rd round and you want to do a high impact play like Queensguard, depending on the matchup of course, you might want to just immediately resurrect your priestesses, because we want to try and win round 1. Round 1 is essentially going to be a setup turn, so we're going to get all of our Queensguards onto the board, and then we're going to use things like Clan Tordorok Shieldsmith. So this gives us 7 power and strengthens an ally by 2 and gives it 2 armor. So this is actually an investment into a future round. We add 9 points to the board, but we also add 2 specifically onto a Queensguard, which means that when we resurrect these come back with extra power on them. So we'd have a 6 and 2 5s just off of one Shieldsmith, for example, because most likely we're going to be playing King Bran to pump these guys up as well. So we use these to invest in future rounds while also adding points to the board as well. 9 point on a bronze is pretty reasonable. Keeps up with like Nilfgaard's level of close to like 10 strength bronzes on their base value, that kind of thing. So we want to win round 1, and we win that essentially by putting points on the board that we get back later anyway. So as I mentioned, we invest with our shieldsmiths. We also have Drake Bondu as well. So 5 strength siege unit. Says, deploy strengthen up to 2 units in your graveyard by 3. Yet again, we want to target the Queen's Guard, because if we strengthen these guys, then we're investing points into a future round. Essentially, he's adding 6 points to 2 different cards, and also adding 5 himself to the board, so he can be a really decent point swing, and you can resurrect him with Sigdriffer as well to get double value. If you do this in the early game, you can Sigdriffer later on as well to resurrect Drake Bondu, who then puts points on the Queen's Guard, and then you use your Priestess Freya to bounce them back. Priestess Freya are kind of the auto-include in any Skellige deck these days. I mean, Skellige is very graveyard focused, so not having 3 copies of this is usually an odd choice, I would say. So these allow us to resurrect bronze units. So after we've resurrected all of our Queen's Guard, and we're on a future round, they've all died, then we can actually resurrect them all again, add 1 point to the board, get all of our Queen's Guard back. And they can also be a target for Gremist as well. Gremist is a 3 strength siege unit. When you deploy him, he's essentially the mage of Skellige. When you deploy him, you get a choice of one of 3 things. You can either apply fog to a row, which could be useful in a long-running matchup, so the initial game, the initial round perhaps, where you want to be investing to try and win the round so that you can cold pass the second round, go into the third round with card advantage hopefully, and the power swing. So you could really use that right there. Every turn at the start of your turn, damage the highest unit on the row by 2, so it can be quite useful. And also use him for clearing weather. This happens quite a lot these days with Ragnar and Drought being quite popular among decks. Clear skies can be very useful. Should be noted as well that Sigdriffer can resurrect Gremist if we need to in the future as well, so we can potentially use him twice. And if we feel that they've got no weather or impenetrable fog's not going to be too useful, we've got Blood-Curdling Roar. So this allows us to destroy an ally, and then we spawn an 11-point bear in its place instead. So adding Blood-Curdling Roar to a Priestess of Freya turns our 1 point into an 11 point, so it's a 10-point gain on the final bit. So he's always useful in some certain aspect. Whether he's clearing the weather or he's doing the Blood-Curdling Roar, these are the most useful ones most of the time anyway. So, after that we've also got our Clan Tursek Skirmishes. Don't know how to pronounce that. Maybe somebody could tell me in the comments. I would be greatly appreciative of that. It's a 7-point bronze unit, most likely going to be a little bit more than that though. It goes onto the melee row as well. With Veteran, it gets a point every single round, so the longer you wait to play this guy, the more power he's going to get every single time, no matter where he is. So if he's in your graveyard, if he's in your deck, if he's in your hand, every round he gets another point on top of that. So he's going to be a 9-point base value unit right at the very end. When this unit leaves the graveyard, however, you get to strengthen it by 3. So we could play this guy in the first round. As we mentioned, in the first round we want to win it, but we also want to invest in future turns. So we can actually play the Skirmishes on round 1, which gets into the graveyard, ready to be resurrected round 2 and round 3, which is going to give it an extra 3 points every single time they do that. So if the Queen's Guard are on the field and we've got Priestess of Freya in our hand, we at least have a target as well in order to hit something of decent value. So Skirmishes are pretty much one of those units that we want to hit. We can actually discard him as well. He's also here for Madman Lugos to enable a decent power swing. So Madman Lugos is 6 strength gold unit, can go onto any row, and when you deploy him, you discard a bronze unit from your deck and damage a unit damage a unit by the discarded unit's base power. So if we discard the Skirmishes, we essentially hit our opponent for 7 on their unit, which can allow us to resurrect that later down the line. We can get some decent value there. So we're not actually discarding a card and losing straight up value, because we can get anything that we discard back which is pretty sweet. And if we haven't actually discarded our pirates, then we can actually hit for 9 points as well. If the extra 2 points does end up mattering, then we can hold on to our pirates until the last moment. Because these are here for deck thinning. They are kind of the flex slot, but I do feel like the thinning of these pirates actually helps with a lot of the deck's consistency as well. Having fewer cards in the deck means that you're more likely to hit the cards that you want later down the line when it comes to mulligans and things like that. They're also a reasonable resurrection target as well at 9 points. They don't get any value from being resurrected, unfortunately, but discarding 2 of these from your deck and playing a 9-pointer is actually pretty decent as it stands anyway. And if we don't discard them prior to that, then we can actually discard them with Madman Lugos and get them into the graveyard, so that is an option available to us as well. So, we did say that we'd talk about Saris. She combos very well with the Queen's Guard, so she is an officer on crate. 6 power, can go onto any row. However, we won't likely be playing her, because we're actually going to be taking advantage of her ability. So she's got counter 4, which means that whatever we need her to do has to trigger 4 times. So while this unit is in your graveyard, decrease the counter whenever a unit is resurrected on your side. When the counter reaches 0, resurrect self. So, depending on the amount of units that we resurrect, this counter here is going to tick down. When it hits 0, then Saris is going to enter the field. She's going to be a 7-pointer, because most likely we're going to be playing her down with King Bran, who then strengthens that unit by 1. So, 7 points whenever we resurrect 4 units. The likelihood is that that's actually going to trigger from our Queen's Guard. Now, we do only have 3 Queen's Guards, so that's going to take 3 counters off Saris. That could be used to make sure that we set up for a Saris trigger on the 3rd round, or if we've actually got Operator, then we can get 4 Queen's Guard in the graveyard, which means a Priestess of Freya resurrects 4 units and instantly triggers Saris to bring her out of the graveyard as well. So there is a nice little synergy there with these guys, which is pretty sweet. Speaking of other golds, we've also got Coral. Coral is a very, 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 very useful card. Nice to take out big point swings from our opponents. So right now, at the moment, there is a Dunbanner Heavy Cavalry who end up getting about 15 to 16 points. Coral allows us to turn that unit into a bronze or silver unit into a Jade figurine, which is just a 2-strength silver card, which actually banishes the card, which means it can't be resurrected. So if we know that our opponent is playing some sort of resurrection, maybe we're in the mirror match and they play their Queen's Guard, then we'll want to Coral their highest Queen's Guard unit so that it just turns into a Jade figurine, which is not something that can be resurrected easily because it is silver, and it's not something you'd want to resurrect even if you could anyway, because it's just 2 points. But if we take down a high value unit like that, then we leave them with a very decent point swing there as well. There is another little combo with Northern Realms as well, with Stennis and Shani. So you play down Stennis, and then in the following round you use Shani to resurrect Stennis that combos off into a really stupidly high-powered, high-value gold card, essentially. If we hit Stennis with Coral, then we actually turn him into a Jade figurine, which actually limits our opponent's Shani targets. Of course, they still have Trollolol, which could also be a target for Coral as well. Something to consider, but it really does hinder our opponent's ability to do some very high value point swings. We then got Ragnarug. It's an interesting choice, I understand that, but when we apply Ragnarug to the board, it applies it to every single row on the board, and every single turn at the start of their turn, we damage the highest unit on the row by 2. So it actually encourages row stacking, which plays very well into Marigold's Hailstone, can be used to essentially increase the value of one of our silvers that way. It can do up to 6 points per turn if the weather is not cleared. Most likely, though, what I like to use Ragnarug for is to either use it in the 3rd round, when we know that they're not running weather, to use that attrition, which can be really backbreaking for our opponents and helps us keep up with maybe their higher tempo. Because Northern Realms can actually do a little bit more of a power swing than our Queen's Guard tends to. So having Ragnarug in the final round allows us to deal a fair amount of damage per turn, sets up the Marigold Hailstone, which can actually turn the matchup in our favour. You can also use it in the 1st round as well. If you use it in the 1st round, quite a lot of the time it ends up with your opponent just passing, so it makes it a really easy round 1 win. which will then allow us to cold pass into the second round if we want to, or even try to bleed cards out of our opponent. We can just really use it to twist our opponent's arm as far as when they pass and what they play and where they play it. So I really do enjoy Ragnar. It is a sweet card. Speaking of Marigold's Hailstone, why do we play it? Because it's Marigold's Hailstone. Every single deck in pretty much Gwent at the moment plays this card. I expect this to be nerfed pretty soon. So it allows us to damage all units on the row by half their power, rounded up, and ignoring armor. So the ignoring armor is very important for Northern Realms that uses a lot of armor. As we mentioned, Trollalol and Dunbanner Heavy Cavalry rely quite heavily on armor, so you can expect that Marigold's Hailstorm actually essentially wouldn't be that good without the armor, so this is really nice to have this here. But if we have some like the Ragnarok and they've been row stacking, we can get up to maybe 15 points on the Marigold's Hailstorm. Usually is an average point value anyway. At the maximum, though, you can get up to 40 points. There's really no limit to how much you can get on Marigold's Hailstorm in terms of value. It's usually stupidly good either way. But you end up having your opponent playing it against you, so being able to play it against your opponent just evens the battlefield in its own little weird way. We then have Alzur's Thunders. So Alzur's Thunders are in here as a little bit of a tech choice against Northern Realms. So Hensel typically likes to lead off with Kaidweni Siege Support, which is a 6 strength unit that boosts all units when another enters the board. So they like to play the Siege Support, play the Hensel, and then thin the other two out of their deck. If we actually Alzur's Thunder the Siege Support right off the bat, then it blanks the Hensel a little bit as well, which makes them essentially play a little bit suboptimally. So I really like playing the Alzur's Thunder because that matchup comes up far too often for its own good, so having the Thunders in here is really useful for that. It's also just decent removal for anything else that we might want to get rid of, so there's really no downside for the most part to Alzur's Thunder, although they are the flex slot, of course. Currently for the meta game, that is the reason what we're going for these guys. Alright guys, well that is going to do it for the deck. If you did enjoy the look of the deck and you want to see the matchups, then be sure to stick around. The matchup should be going up immediately. And if you want to hit that like button and subscribe button, it lets me know you're enjoying the series, makes me want to make more Gwent content, because I do enjoy this game very much, despite not being amazing at it, but there you go. And if you hit that little bell icon as well, you'll get notifications when new videos go live. I do hope you've enjoyed the deck tech, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.